and wherever the row and the column intersect, that is where you are going to pull the information from. G'day everybody, this is Mooper Sega on behalf of Mooper Corp. Before you can build anything, you must know the blueprint ID. And that is what we are going to find out in this video. Let's get cracking. Now, I hope you have headed on over to the bread and butter workbook and you have done that, because if you have, you will have access to this, okay? So you're gonna have your inv types, you're gonna have industry activity materials and industry activity products. Now, to explain these very quickly, industry activity products equals, when you're thinking about industry activity products, it's column A is the blueprint ID, all right? Column A, once put through this kind of operation, if it is a 1 for manufacturing or it is an 8 for invention, will produce this type ID, okay? So this type ID produces this type ID and it produces one of them, okay? Now, industry activity materials is different. It says that this type ID through this type of operation requires this kind of material and it requires this many. And because there is 3 instances of that one same blueprint ID, it says that it requires 3 different types of materials, okay? Inv types is the basic one, that everything in the game has a type ID. Plagioclase is 18, and the one that we all know, tritanium, is number 34, okay? So let's get cracking straight away. Now, I have saved my bread and butter as a template, so I can keep coming back to this and just add sheets onto it. So this sheet I've already set up with some very basic formatting so that I can make it at least pretty. I don't want to be staring at a blank sheet like this. That's no good. I'm going to call this sheet item lookup, okay? So in the top, in column A, I'm going to call this type name. Now that is just going to be the name of the actual item in the game. All right, now column 2 is going to be type ID. And column C is I'm going to call it blueprint ID, but you don't necessarily need to think of it purely as a blueprint ID. There will be things in Tech 3, there will be instances where it doesn't actually require a blueprint per se. It might be a relic or whatever else, okay? So let's just smash this out. Now, what I'm going to do 2 examples here. I'm going to do one example where I use an index match, and then I'm going to use another example where I use the SUMIFS function, okay? Now, I would always implore you to go down the path of index match. Try and understand index match as soon as you can, because it is the formula that is, or it is the function, sorry, that is not a volatile function. So you can smash this out and it doesn't need to equate or reevaluate every time that you change something in the sheet, unless it is dependent or has a dependency on that cell, okay? So I would always say try and use index match wherever possible, as it is not a volatile formula, okay? I'm going to use index match for type ID, and I'm going to use SUMIFS for blueprint ID, okay? So let's look up Rifter, and let's look up an anathema, and let's look up, I don't know what they're called or how they are, what their like syntax is, 5MN micro warp drive I'm not sure if that's how it is kind of spaced out. I don't build modules. To find out the type ID, before I can find out the blueprint ID, which will be in industry activity products, I need to find out the type ID, which will be in inv types. So you will notice that this time, because we have imported this information in that bread and butter workbook, I'm not actually going to look up things like using regular cell references, right? I'm not going to go something like this. I'm not going to go X look up this value and look it up in this column. You know, I'm not going to use regular referencing like that. I'm actually going to use referencing to an actual table, because if you did that workbook that we were talking about, the bread and butter, your tables will already be set up, okay? So in type ID here, I'm going to go equals index and then the array. Very, very quickly, when we're talking about index match, we are essentially saying that, hey, here is your array. Array is just a group of, or a range of cells, a range of values. It'll be, let's say, 5 across and 20 down. Let's use that as an example. The index, what it does, it says your first part of your formula is this section, which is array. So what actually is your entire array that you want to be indexing in? It'll be this one, and the next thing that it looks for is the row number. So which row do you want to find the information in? So it will find the row and go down to that row, and then the next section is which column will that information be in. So then you also put an index over to the top of that, which says that this is where I want the information from. So those values will intersect, and wherever the row and the column intersect, that is where you are going to pull the information from. Now that is just scratching the surface of index match, but let's get that done. So the actual entire array that I want to search is inf types. I want to press square bracket to actually find the data section here. It's like a hashtag data or whatever. I don't think it's called hashtag, but yeah. So data, and then, I said data. The row number that I want to find, here is where we are going to use the next special part about an index match. Index by itself is great, but we can use match to actually find what row Rifter is in. So I'm going to go match, tab, and then I'm going to say look up this value, which is Rifter. All right, and I want that to be absolute in the column with the dollar symbol in the front. The lookup array that I want to find this information in is going to be inf types. Like I know that you will find anathema in inf types type name. Okay, the next section will be an exact match. I need it to be an exact match. And then I already know that in column, the answer will be in column 1. All right, now I could also match. I could use another match for that entire array, just like I did there, and search for the instance where I find type ID. And then it will bring the same number type, column 1, and then row whatever. But I know that it's going to be in column 1. We don't actually need to make that one dynamic, okay? So I'm going to put a 1 in there. So in other words, it's going to find what row anathema is in column B there. And then it is going to find, and then it is going to go down to that row and search in column 1. And whatever value is in that cell, it's going to return that value. And in this instance, it is 587, okay? 587. If I go over here and I search in the type IDs here for Rifter, if I do a filter here, I just want to see Rifter, its type ID is indeed 587, okay? So moving on, that is how you use index match. Now we're going to use it more and more and more. Okay, blueprint ID. So to find out the blueprint ID, we need to go over here. We need to go to industry activity products, all right? We need to search at the top. So a Rifter will be in column C, okay? So what we want to find out what is in column A, because that's the actual type ID of the blueprint, yeah? The blueprint produces the product, and we want to produce a Rifter. So the Rifter, we need to find out where the Rifter is in here. So we need to find out an instance of 587 over here, and which will give us the blueprint that goes over here, okay? So now if I go here, I'm going to go to the blueprint ID. Here we are going to use a sum ifs function because we are looking for multiple conditions, right? Sum ifs. Now the range that we are going to be looking to sum, now I know it says sum because how sum ifs works, it is every time it finds the criteria that you specify, it will take that value and sum it to the next time that it finds that criteria that you have specified, all right? So you can get into trouble here if you are not certain that there is only one instance that those criterias will exist, okay? Now, I'm 100% sure in this instance that there will only be one instance where type ID 587 matches the industrial action, which is number 1, okay? And I'll show you what I mean. So the sum range will be in industry activity products, right? Because we want to return whatever is in column A of industry activity products, and that column A is type ID. Next of all, the criteria range 1. So the first criteria that we want to look for, where will we find that? Criteria range 1 will be industry activity products, and it's going to be product type ID. So where will we find a 587, okay? And the actual condition or the criteria that we are looking for in that place is that one there. So I put a comma, and then click on that one. And I'm going to make that absolute in the column just because. Now the next criteria, where will we find our next criteria? It's also going to be in industry activity products, and it's going to be in activity ID, and it's going to be the activity of number 1, which is manufacturing, okay? I've closed that off with a close paren, and then here we are. There's the blueprint ID for a rifter, okay? 691. Just to be sure, let's go and find that. So here we go. We know what the type ID is for a rifter. It is 587. And I just want to find an exact match of 587. And the type ID that will produce that rifter, if we do it through industry, is going to be 691. So that is how you find out the actual blueprint ID. Because the next step that we will be talking about in the next video is going to be this, where we can go over to, we can get that blueprint ID, and we go to industry activity materials. What was it? 691. Now I can go to the blueprint ID and I can type in 691 like this. And that will tell me that the things that are required to build a rifter. This is activity 1, remember? Activity 1, not activity 8. This is because if activity 8 is using that blueprint, that rifter blueprint to invent. So you would be inventing a jaguar or a wolf. So that is that. So we wouldn't be counting those ones, but we would be looking at this, and we can say that it requires 22,778 tritanium. Okay. So the material type ID here is tritanium, pyrite, mexilon, whatever. And that is what is required in that rifter. So that's what we'll be looking at in the next video. But for now, let's drag this formula down. Let's drag this formula down. And let's and now, so there's our micro warp drive. A micro warp drive is 1067. So apparently a micro warp drive requires these things. It requires 3,967 tritanium, 2,131 pyrite. And let's just very quickly have a little look at that and see if that's correct. So let's go back to the rifter. Now, what did it say? If we go to a rifter, we go to the rifter blueprint here. Let's have a look. So there it is, guys. It says 22,778 tritanium, 6,222 pyrite. Let's see if that is correct. Yep, 6,222 pyrite, 2,222 mexilon, 365 isogen, 133 noxium, 34 zedrine, and 2 megasite. Is that all correct? Yes, it is all correct. Terrific. I'm going to see you guys in the next video. Moopa Sega out. Thank you.